We are obviously quite disappointed in the ruling of a single federal judge to disenfranchise over 1 million Virginian citizens who legally voted to amend our Constitution to define marriage. Their decision, fully informed and based on the belief that the state's interest in marriage is to ensure that children have the best possible outcomes, has been rendered meaningless by a single federal judge with the assistance of our own Attorney General. Protecting a timeless institution for the well-being of children was the will of the overwhelming majority of Virginians, and this ruling denies that important state interest as it places the desires of adults over the outcomes of children. The state has no interest in affirming the love lives of its citizens, but it does have an interest in protecting children. It is its only interest in marriage. I find it deeply troubling that the judge ignored volumes of social science that show that children in general have better outcomes when they have both a mom and a dad, and dismissed the timeless institution of marriage, or the case law that goes back decades that recognizes the state's interest in marriage is in children. Instead, she resorted to name-calling and attacks on personal motives and beliefs. Beliefs that are often based on faith, but also often simply based on experience and science. This is yet another decision by a judge on the issue of marriage that is not based on any of the facts of the case, any of the evidence presented in the hearings, or any of the truth surrounding the state's interest in marriage, but instead based on the belief by these judges that an overwhelming majority of Virginians who voted to protect marriage can be motivated only by animus. That is not factual, and it ignores the complete facts of the case, replacing them with an emotional outburst by a judge. The timing of this decision certainly calls into question Judge Wright Allen's objectivity. This rushed release just prior to Valentine's reeks of political show, making her ruling less a legal argument and more a press release. It's disappointing that a federal judge would so blatantly expose her personal political agenda at the expense of not just marriage, but our entire social fabric. I'll now take any questions that you would have.
I imagine that this is going to go to appeals court, obviously. Just how hopeful are you that this could actually be overturned? Do you think it's a possibility, or do you think the likelihood of that happening is not likely?
Well, we certainly will continue to work with our allies at Alliance Defending Freedom who have fought this case through the whole process, and we will work through the appeals process. I don't think anyone can say what a judge is going to do. It's disappointing when they throw out precedent and then bring in all sorts of brand new cases that aren't actually specifically on point. So we just don't know. We'll look forward to hoping that a judge would uphold our Constitution.
Do the proponents to the same-sex marriage, they say that marriage equality is a civil right? Do you agree?
The state's interest in marriage is about children. It isn't about what people want to do in relationships that are private among each other. That is not of relevance to the government. And so the reality is that government has engaged in marriage and been a part of that and had an interest in it because of the outcomes of kids. So the civil right issue is set aside because they can have the relationships. That's not government's interest. They're not being denied the commitment and the love. The state is just not interested in that because it doesn't affect the children.
Does the ruling in Kentucky earlier this week give you concern that the judicial tide on this is turning sort of nationally?
Well, sadly, we're seeing activist judges around the country making decisions that aren't based on the state's interest in marriage. So I think every decision is a reason for concern when it goes against the precedent, it goes against the state's interest. And so certainly, but we're going to keep hoping that the Supreme Court is going to look at the history of marriage and the well-being of kids.
In the judge's ruling, she does mention the government not getting involved in the personal lives of people, and that being one of her reasoning for doing this. Do you buy that argument as far as the government shouldn't be the ones telling people who should and should not be able to get married?
Sure. Marriage is actually society's best guarantee of the least amount of government interference in private lives. And that's because intact, enduring marriages are the best protection of children, and therefore government can spend the least amount on all the social welfare programs, juvenile justice, that are the outcomes of broken families and of single parents and of the reality of what happens sometimes when unfortunately kids are not able to have both a mom and a dad. And what we're doing here is intentionally allowing the creation of households without either a mom or a dad.